Yeah, so security nightmares, that's what I'm here to talk about today. So this session is voice the next mobile? Or how to talk about voice and other new technology. This is a framework for how to think about new tech. But first, a little bit about me. I'm Jack Madden. I'm the executive editor of BrianMadden.com. And so for those of you that aren't familiar, I'll kind of spell it out. So Brian and I are brothers. He founded this site, BrianMadden.com, covering Citrix before blogs covering IT were really a thing back in the early 2000s. We became a part of TechTarget in 2008, and now Brian has actually moved on to the other side, the non-independent side. You may have seen that he's off at VMware now, but I'm still here running BrianMadden.com. We hired a new executive, or a new editor to work with me. His name is Kyle Johnson, so you'll see some of his articles coming up soon. And at BrianMadden.com, we've always been interested in desktop virtualization, and me personally, I've been doing enterprise mobility and end-user computing since 2011. They brought me on initially I was going to be desktop virtualization blogger number 3. I was the junior member of the staff. And around 2011, we started getting all these pitches from vendors like, hey, look at our solution to deal with BYOD iPhones. And they said to me, well, why don't you go sort of figure out what that BYOD iPhone thing is all about? And that was around the time when the M6 conference here was first started. And that was 2011, and kind of the rest is history. I've probably written over 1,000 articles on end-user computing, probably at least half of those on enterprise mobility management itself. And during that time period when we were all trying to figure out what this MDM and enterprise mobility thing is all about, I also wrote this early book, Enterprise Mobility Management, Everything You Need to Know About MDM, MAM, and BYOD. So if you want to talk about any of this type of stuff, I have some slots in the afternoon one-to-one time, so I'd love to hear what you're up to in mobility or end-user computing and all of that now. And finally, I'll give a plug for the easiest way to find what I do and what I'm interested in is my Twitter account. It's @JackMadden. I keep it all enterprise mobility, all end-user computing. But I'm not all business all the time. Just one little personal bit about me. So in my spare time, I like to play classical music. I studied classical music, and I play in a volunteer symphony orchestra in San Francisco. Now, this is the orchestra that I play in. It's a little bit hard to see me there. I'm all the way in the back. And I'm all the way in the back because I play trombone. And it's OK that I'm all the way in the back because the trombone is the loudest instrument. So on to our topic for today. So why are we here? Why am I giving this session right now? So voice is everywhere, and voice means a lot of different things, but the consumer hype, it's surely at its peak. And by voice, I mean Siri and the Apple HomePod, Alexa and the Amazon Echo, Samsung with their Bixby digital assistant in their Galaxy devices, or Microsoft Cortana, and Google with Google Assistant. These devices, they're showing up in Super Bowl commercials. They're on the news all the time for the hot consumer tech trends of the year. If you follow the Consumer Electronics Show, every single device out there, half of everything at CES this year it had Alexa integration, it had Google Now integration. Voice control is clearly hot right now. So the question that we want to ask is, will voice be the next mobile? Because mobile was a big deal in our world. That's why this conference got started when it was M6. Mobile changed a lot of things. And this is a question that we're asking at BrianMadden.com this year. This is we focus on a lot of things, but this is one of our mini topics right now. Because frankly, a lot of us were so concerned about mobile in the first place because it seemed like these iPhones, which initially it's like, this is an overgrown iPod and you want me to put secure corporate email on it now? That's probably what a lot of us were thinking about 2008, 2009. So now that these Apple HomePods, these Amazon Echo devices, these Google Minis, now that they're everywhere and the big hype thing, it's like, oh geez, are we going to have to deal with this whole thing over again that we did with mobility? Because we had a lot to figure out and a lot to scramble to do at that time. So it's natural to be asking this question. So since we're asking this question, let's take a look back and see what mobile meant. So mobile meant, sure, it changed the way it worked, but as I acknowledged, mobile was a security nightmare. And it was also, ever since then, it's been a long journey to figure out how our enterprise apps can best take advantage of mobility. And we're still in that process right now, as we heard from our panel sessions yesterday. So mobile was this huge, once every couple of decades change for IT and for business. With the consumer hype around voice, we want to, well, before I get to that, I should say that I consider mobility, we've solved a lot of the big questions in mobility right now. We have enterprise mobility management. The device management APIs are all there. We have mature concepts for how we're going to deal with BYOD and how we're going to mobilize enterprise apps. Of course, our individual organizations, we still may be in our mobility journey, and there are a lot of long-tail issues that we're solving, like Android enterprise management is just now in 2018 getting to the point where Android enterprise APIs have been part of the core Android OS long enough that, hey, in 2018, 2019, maybe we can base our BYOD policy off of Android Enterprise because it's been disseminated to enough of the devices. So we're working on long tail issues in mobility, but for the most part, mobility is solved from the big picture perspective. So again, with all this hype around voice and digital assistants and smart speakers and ambient computing, it's natural for us to ask, what does voice mean for us? And so this is what my presentation is about today. And this session is not about all of the specific answers. I can't answer what voice means to your organization, and we certainly haven't seen all exactly, okay, so how are we going to secure every single voice interface and what APIs exist to manage this device and this device. But what this session is, it's how to think about voice. It's when I approach any new technology area like augmented reality or virtual reality or drones or wearables, it's, okay, let's break this down. So in other words, I consider this session kind of my ground rules for tech conversations. Before we talk about the augmented reality hype, let's have some ground rules, for example. So what do we even mean by voice? We use voice generically, but let's identify some of the specific things that we're talking about. First of all, voice can mean text-to-speech. It means I say a word, some sort of magic happens, and suddenly this text box in my application contains the text of what I just said. And that's one of the things that machine learning has really improved those transcription rates in the last couple of years to where that text-to-speech is actually usable. That's the thing that really helps all of this happen. Voice also means a conversational interface, a back and forth, question and answer. This may be a bot. It may be, or you can think of this as the flashy 2018 version of interactive voice response. When we talk about voice, we also talk about natural language processing, which now natural language processing, this can also be a typed query, but this means that if I want to know when my next appointment is, I can ask, what's next on my calendar? Or what are my meetings today? Or what do I have to do next? I can use a couple of different terms, perhaps several different ways to ask the same question. I don't have to know the exact format for the query to ask what the next calendar event is. I can say it naturally. And then the other part that we're thinking about with voice is making it smart. It knows things like today it knows the weather and it knows my location. And we think of adding what else are our digital assistants going to know. Voice also means different devices. Voice means an ambient user interface. It means that instead of holding my phone or going to my workstation or my laptop, my phone can be on the table, or I can have a smart speaker in my living room, and I don't need to be there looking at it and touching at it. I can be facing completely away from it, and wherever I walk in the room, wherever I look, it's there. It means smart speakers. It means a new class of device. We had desktops, then laptops, then feature phones, then smartphones and tablets. Now we have yet another category of device to deal with. It means digital assistants like Siri and Bixby and all the others. And it means new use cases of thinking of what's the appropriate app to talk back and forth versus seeing a graphical user interface. And when we talk about voice, we also talk about security and management. How do we make sure that someone, if a voice assistant has access to sensitive information on a device or it's hooked up to one of our business applications, how do we make sure that the correct user is using it? And it means, how does that digital assistant, for example, if we have an Echo in our conference room, how does it hook into Exchange and our conference call system so it knows the schedule of the room? Voice is an application integration question as well. So really, I don't like to say, let's talk about voice. I like to say, let's talk about one of the dozen or so issues on this. And you'll see this from the blog. I like to break things down and get specific. So let's move on to the security management and integration, because in this room, a lot of us are IT people, and sure, what new applications we can make with voice are interesting. But what we really want to know is that our user that went out and bought an Amazon Echo, and suddenly they're trying to get their email on it, or their calendar or schedule, or they're downloading skills that, hey, maybe, I saw people working at enterprise software vendors. A friend of mine on Twitter, he's like, look at this skill that I made that plugs into Nutanix. And as us as IT practitioners in the room, it's like, wait, so someone is buying Echoes and suddenly they're having Alexa skills that are plugging into our enterprise systems? This is frankly what we're all worried about. And I learned everything that I need to know about voice security and really security in general from the 1992 movie Sneakers. Anybody see this movie? So in the movie Sneakers, I won't go into the full plot, but part of their task is to get into a secured room. It is secured with a physical identification card, and it is secured with a voice biometric prompt. Now, through some very awkward social engineering, they steal the physical key card, and they make a recording and do a simple replay attack and successfully bypass this authentication mechanism. And again, you're telling me that the Echo devices and the Siri is everywhere, and hey, the Siri device is on the same phone that my executive has their corporate email account, and we spend all this time concerned about email security and all the regulations, and suddenly we're worrying about replay attacks on our executive devices. And in fact, my other editor and I tried this out with Hey Siri. I said, we just made a recording on his voice recorder, played it back, and guess what? It works. So let's break this down. Again, when we're worrying about voice security, as I mentioned before, I like to get specific about which domain that we're talking about. So to think about how we secure voice, we need to think, where is the voice? So the interface can be built into a mobile device like Siri, or a laptop like Cortana, or a smart speaker like Alexa. So in that case, it's device-centric. Or it can be part of a web app or a mobile app. Yesterday, we saw a sneak preview of that assistant built into the IBM MAS 360 email client. Or it can be a cloud application. And on the back end, the voice, it's interfacing with our cloud APIs or some cloud service, or maybe it's connected to an MBAS, which, by the way, look at that. MBAS, I'm sure there have been lots of sessions at ET6 and M6 over the years talking about MBAS. Well, guess what? That's something that you can recycle and reuse for voice. And the final security question that we have is, well, where does the actual text-to-speech and natural language processing happen? if my device is taking a recording of the user's request and sending it off to some cloud service, well, that's clearly an issue if we have data residency requirements and we don't want our possibly sensitive recordings going who knows where. So how do we secure these respective locations? Well, it turns out that most of these, we already know how to secure these. A mobile device, a laptop, and a smart speaker, well, that's a MDM or Unified Endpoint Management-like question. And some of these smart devices, like Alexa and Amazon Echo, there are new MDM-like APIs for smart speakers. So MDM is not a new concept for those of us in the room. We're at ET6, which was M6. MDM, we know the deal. And for web apps and mobile apps and cloud apps, this becomes a mobile app management question or an integration choice. So maybe it's your enterprise email client. You decide, OK, I'm not going to integrate that with my device's ambient voice interface because I don't want that leaking out. Or maybe I have a question for the IBM folks now. Maybe there's a mobile app management key or configuration that, hey, maybe for some of our more sensitive use cases, that built-in digital assistant sounds great, but maybe we want to use mobile app management concepts to turn that off in some sensitive locations. And integrating with cloud services. Again, this is an identity and access management decision that we're all familiar with now. And we decide, hey, maybe we integrate with the cloud service that we're already comfortable with. And finally, the text-to-speech. Some of these devices, some of them they'll be doing the voice processing on the device. Some of them will be doing in the cloud service. And maybe it's maybe the answer, and I'm not saying this is what is happening today, but we have government versions of Azure. We have Azure and AWS in all of these different locations. So maybe it's OK. So if Azure or AWS is doing our natural language processing, we just need to make sure that it's in the same cloud location where we're already operating. So these aspects of voice security are all things that we've pretty much solved before. Now, there is that question of how do you authenticate over a voice interface, as was illustrated by Sneakers. And this is even something that, sure, today, so obviously you can't do a password over a voice interface because that fails, because everyone can just hear your password, so that's out. And when it comes to voice biometrics of hearing, being able to listen to my voice and differentiate it from my colleague's voice, sure, Hey Siri can tell the difference between me and my colleague, but for example, none of the mainstream digital assistants yet are making any claims that they're solely going to identify you, with a comfortable margin of error just by your voice print alone. If there are any service, there may be some specialty services out there that are making that claim, but none of the mainstream digital assistants are making that claim yet. And so maybe it's, instead to authenticate, well, maybe we need to protect against a replay attack with a recording. Maybe it's a liveness test. If you're familiar with audio and such, you know that in real life, our voice has very high frequencies and very low frequencies, that if I'm doing a replay attack, that tape recorder, that voice recorder is going to have a much narrower frequency range. So maybe it's our microphone that we're using to do our voice authentication is extremely sensitive and can detect those voice high and low ranges so that we know that it's not a replay attack. Or maybe it's just something much more simpler. You have a voice CAPTCHA. During that login process, the digital assistant says, OK, to prove that you're a real person, divide 12 by 3, and you have to say 4. Now, maybe that's not the best example because you could just have a recording of every number 1 through 4, but you get the idea. A voice CAPTCHA is another concept that we could implement. But if you're following the identity and access management space, you know that the trend today is even away from single-factor authentication or multi-factor or two-factor authentication. It goes on to continuous authentication. And we can do things like maybe we also look at the location of the user's mobile device to make sure that the user's mobile device is in the same conference room as where that Amazon Echo is. Or maybe we do a push notification to the user's device to log in. But the trend in identity and access management today, the cutting edge, is continuous authentication and behavioral authentication, where our systems are looking at many, many different factors of the user's behavior instead of just relying on, does the smart speaker know that my voice biometric sounds like me? So these are also problems that are eminently solvable. Of course, we still reserve the right to be paranoid. I'm sure you all saw the news a couple of weeks ago that says, woman says her Amazon device recorded private conversation, comma, sent it out to random contact. And that story was pretty scary, and as it turns out, this is an article from The Verge. They got a statement from Amazon that says, Amazon explains how Alexa recorded a private conversation, which we sent it to another user. It turns out through an extraordinary chain of errors, it accidentally misheard all of the commands to record the conversation and send it to a user. And that's an extraordinary rare chain of events, but with, I don't know how many hundreds of millions or if they're in the billions level of processing voice commands. When you get to that level, these amazingly rare things can happen, and suddenly Alexa is in the news. Or you have things like, just came out yesterday, there was a flaw in Cortana that was patched with a Windows patch that went out yesterday, I think, where a flaw in Cortana could allow somebody to get into a Windows device. But again, that was patched, and that's why we patch, and thanks to modern management concepts like Windows as a service, or possibly in iOS 12 automatic OS updates, which might be a thing if you've been following the WWDC news closely. That's okay. So we reserve the right to be paranoid, but these are generally solvable problems. Integration, I said, again, we know the drill. Integrating a voice interface, it's going to be very similar to what we did for the last 10 years, integrating enterprise mobile apps into our traditional systems of record. Let's move on to a few examples. So one example is Siri. So we're thinking about, so how do we integrate with different voice assistants? For example, in Siri, it's directly on the device. And it was that third-party applications were limited to a few predefined ways to interact with Siri. As of iOS 12, the intents and ways that your third-party application can interact with Siri is now, you can build a custom intent so it can interact in any way you want. And on the management side, well, it turns out, so we have MDM APIs for Siri. You can, if you have a device enrolled in MDM, you can set it so Siri can't be used, or so that Siri can't be used while the device is locked. Now, do be aware that it was announced again at WWDC that if you want to lock down Siri on BYOD devices, after 2019, that's not really going to be possible. Those Siri restrictions are going to be deprecated to supervised mode, which for those of you that have put a lot of Apple devices, you know that that's generally something that you're using for enterprise devices. But remember, there are plenty of other ways to ensure that our data doesn't end up where we don't want it. On the Amazon side, if you look at the Alexa for Business management, so Alexa for Business was a thing announced, about 6 months ago. I think it was November. But, there are MDM APIs, essentially, for Alexa. And Citrix at Synergy was just a month ago, announced that they're adding support. And fun fact here, it turns out that BYOD for Amazon Echo is a thing. So someone can buy their personal Echo device, they can associate it with your enterprise managed Alexa for Business implementation. You can manage what private enterprise Alexa skills the user can access on their personal Echo device. I mean, we thought we were good with dealing with email and apps on BYOD iPhones and Android. Guess what? BYOD Echo is a thing now. So that's something that we all get to look forward to. So good luck with that. I'm looking forward to hearing a year from now everybody's case studies. But the thing that we really care about is the use cases. Where are these things going to be useful? And we have to know what really works well in voice, because general AI, having HAL 9000, is very far away. So voice today, it's more like a terminal-based conversation. It's a back and forth. And as I mentioned before, the natural language processing helps with the users don't have to know the exact format for commands. So the issue that comes up with voice is that you sort of have to know what questions your voice UI can answer and which it can't. And so narrower domains are easier. So with calendaring or contacts or messaging, that's a fairly narrow domain. And so when enterprise use cases, well, so we see that some tasks really aren't going to be good for that back and forth conversation. They're going to be much better for a graphical user interface. And indeed, we are a ways away from making voice truly smart. Questions like, what time is my meeting? That's a very specific question that we can ask. But do I have to wear a suit to my meeting? Well, there are a lot of questions there. You have to know about their previous relationship with the people at the meeting, and are you going to a restaurant that is expensive, or are you going to Starbucks? And all of these different skills and domains, for as smart as digital assistants claim to be, integrating all of these domains and skills into a digital assistant is a very manual process today in 2018. So for bringing voice into the enterprise, what's the killer use case? So obviously personal productivity, calendaring and such, I'm sure a lot of us do that today with our digital assistants. But we're kind of wondering, okay, what's going to be beyond that? And so we see some early use cases. Amazon is especially pushing ambient devices in conference rooms. You just walk in and say, start my meeting, and it's connected to Exchange, and it's connected to your Zoom or GoToMeeting, and it makes it happen. So that sounds pretty cool. And of course, there are the industrial and hands-free use cases where obviously you want the user with their hands on the physical parts, and they want to be very undisturbed. And that's clearly a great use case that has been around for quite a while. And then there are lots of places where natural language queries could help. I see this, one of the examples that I can imagine this being in is, so in my office at TechTarget, I sit near the sales team, and I hear the reps go to the sales VP, and they have their weekly reviews and stuff, and they say, like, how far away are you from your number so far this week? Or how many calls did you make this week? And so if we had an Echo sitting right there on the sales VP's desk, or Cortana or Siri on his computer that could hook up to Salesforce, I could see that saving them a lot of time in their meetings, because instead of wanting them having to go and log into Salesforce, it would be right there. So the use cases will emerge. But back to our original question, is voice the next mobile? We have to look at, what does mobile mean again? Mobile really meant lots of things: video, a focused user interface, images. It means modern end-user computing management. To me, voice is just a couple more building blocks to add on top of all those new things that we got with mobile. And then there are certain other building blocks that are going to look very similar, I think. Things like wearable devices, augmented reality, virtual reality, drones. It'll be right there and plug in. So I've got 47 seconds left. So hopefully you'll excuse me if I go over time, 1 or 2 minutes. OK, I got the thumbs up. So our grand conclusions are, we wanted to ask if voice is going to be the next mobile. And the first thing we need to do is heed all the lessons that we learned from mobile. Mobile broke us out of homogeneous IT with thinking Windows desktops to thinking iOS, Android, everything. So mobile is going to be one more thing. Heed the lessons from mobile. Realize that unique security challenges of authenticating over a voice UI, these are all eminently solvable. I think in our application strategy going forward, voice is just one more building block, and the use cases will naturally bubble up and prove themselves over time. So my final thoughts are then to think about voice and have an open mind of what it could be and see what happens. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna let you go yet. Any questions?
Any questions about voice? If anybody has any voice plans, I'd love to hear about them during the afternoon one-on-one time, or pick my brain, or tell me what you agree with or disagree with. I'd love to hear it. But I see a question right there from George.
So, Jack, beyond some of what you kind of highlighted at a high level, have you seen any instances to date yet, though, where there are any enterprises or, excuse me, I'll even say, because perhaps you may have had that exposure, some government agencies, for example, that are utilizing voice and building on the mobile stack as you described?
I have. These are not public references, unfortunately, but they seem to be fairly simple so far. It's text-to-speech to, instead of writing up a report back in the office, it's taking text-to-speech notes and putting them right into a field service application is one thing that I heard recently. So I think it's very early days today, so we'll see. Any other questions?
Jack, thank you very much. And please, if you want to get any one-on-one time with Jack, I think he has a couple of slots open this afternoon. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.